June 1944, Normandy. A veteran German Panzer commander, confident in his superior Tiger tank's thick armor and devastating 88mm gun, suddenly found his entire worldview shattered when a group of inferior American Sherman tanks appeared from 3 directions at once, executing a flanking maneuver he never saw coming. In that split second, everything he'd been taught about American tactical incompetence crumbled as shells began striking his tank's vulnerable sides and rear. But how did these supposedly outmatched Sherman crews pull off a maneuver so perfectly coordinated that it would revolutionize tank warfare forever?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. June 15th, 1944. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of Normandy, France. 9 days had passed since Allied forces stormed the beaches. The world was changing, but inside the steel hull of Tiger Tank 231, Obergefreiter Klaus Müller felt secure. His fingers traced the thick armor plating that surrounded him. 8 inches of solid steel. Nothing the Americans had could punch through it. Klaus had grown up in a small farming town outside Berlin. His father fixed tractors and farm equipment. His mother baked bread for the local bakery. Life was simple then. When the war started in 1939, Klaus was just 19 years old. He believed everything the government told him. Germany was strong, Germany was right, the American soldiers were weak and poorly trained. Their tanks were thin-skinned death traps. The political situation in Germany had filled young men like Klaus with pride. Their leaders promised a 1,000-year empire. They would rule all of Europe. The American industrial machine was built by lazy workers who cared more about money than duty. German engineering was the best in the world. German soldiers were the bravest. German tanks were unstoppable. Klaus looked around the inside of his Tiger tank. The massive 88mm gun could destroy any Allied tank from over a mile away. The engine produced 700 horsepower. The cracks were nearly 3 feet wide. This machine weighed 57 tons of pure destructive power. In 3 years of fighting, Klaus had knocked out dozens of enemy tanks. Russian T-34s, British Churchills, American Shermans. They all burned the same way. The crew of Tiger 231 had been together for 8 months. Hans, the driver, came from Munich. He used to work in a car factory before the war. Otto, the radio operator, was from Hamburg. His father owned a small shipping business. Wilhelm, the loader, grew up on a farm like Klaus. They trusted each other completely. They moved like parts of the same machine. The technological advantage seemed clear to Klaus and his crew. German optics were superior. Their rangefinders were more accurate. The Tiger's gun could penetrate any Allied tank armor at normal fighting distances. Meanwhile, the American Sherman tanks had to get dangerously close to have any hope of damaging a Tiger. Most of the time, Sherman shells just bounced off the German armor like pebbles.
Economic factors also favor Germany in Klaus's mind. The homeland was producing new wonder weapons, jet aircraft, rocket-powered missiles, self-guiding torpedoes. Soon the tide of war would turn. The Americans would go back across the ocean where they belonged. The British would surrender. France would remain under German control forever. Law enforcement in occupied France worked in Germany's favor too. The local police helped identify resistance fighters. French civilians who helped Allied soldiers faced severe punishment. Most people kept their heads down and stayed out of the war. This made it easier for German forces to maintain control of the countryside. The location where Tiger 231 now waited perfectly suited Klaus's tactical thinking. They sat hull down behind a low ridge about 2 miles south of the town of Villers-Bocage. The position gave them a clear view of the main road running east to west. Any Allied tanks using that road would have to cross open ground for over 1,000 yards. Klaus could pick them off one by one before they got close enough to shoot back. The landscape around Villers-Bocage consisted of small fields divided by thick hedgerows. These ancient walls of earth and stone had marked property lines for hundreds of years. The hedgerows created a maze of narrow lanes and hidden passages. German forces used them for cover and concealment. Allied tanks found them difficult to cross. Klaus had established himself as a leader in his unit through consistent success in combat. His superiors trusted his judgment. His subordinates followed his orders without question. He wore the Iron Cross Second Class on his uniform. Soon he might earn the Iron Cross First Class if he continued destroying enemy tanks at his current rate. The community of tankers in the German army respected Klaus's abilities. Veterans shared stories of his most impressive kills. New crews asked for his advice. Tank commanders throughout the division knew his reputation. He represented everything the German Tank Corps wanted to be: skilled, aggressive, and completely loyal to the cause. But on this quiet morning, something felt different. Klaus noticed unusual radio chatter from other German positions. Reports of American tank movements seemed confused and contradictory. Some units reported Sherman tanks moving north along the main road. Others claimed to see them heading south on parallel routes. A few positions mentioned tracks in the mud, suggesting tanks had moved during the night. The sounds reaching Klaus's ears through his headphones puzzled him. Usually, American tank attacks followed predictable patterns. They moved in straight lines down roads. They attacked obvious objectives. They made lots of noise. Today, the radio reports suggested something more complex was happening. Wilhelm noticed it first. Fresh tank tracks crossed a field about 800 yards to their left. The tracks headed north toward a patch of woods that offered good concealment. Klaus studied the treads through his binoculars. They looked like Sherman tank tracks, but why would American tanks move in that direction? It made no tactical sense.
British accent. Hans reported strange engine sounds coming from the south. Multiple vehicles were moving, but they stayed hidden behind the hedgerows. The sounds faded in and out as if the vehicles were stopping and starting frequently. Klaus had never heard American tanks operate this way before. They usually charged forward with engines roaring at full power. Something was beginning that Klaus did not understand. The first hints of suspicious activity were appearing all around Tiger 231, but they did not fit any pattern Klaus recognized from his years of combat experience. The radio crackled with more reports over the next 20 minutes. Klaus pressed his headphones closer to his ears and tried to make sense of what he was hearing. German positions scattered across the area reported American tank movements, but none of the reports matched what Klaus expected. The Americans were not charging down the main road in a straight line like they usually did. Oberfeldwebel Meyer's voice came through the static from his position 1,200 yards to the east. 3 Sherman tanks had appeared at the edge of Hoffmann's woods, then disappeared again before Meyer could get a clear shot. Unteroffizier Schwitz reported similar sightings from his spot near the church. American tanks kept showing themselves for a few seconds, then vanishing behind cover. Klaus had fought Americans for 8 months. He knew their tactics by heart. They always attacked the same way. First, their artillery would pound German positions for an hour. Then their infantry would advance in neat lines across open ground. Finally, their tanks would roll forward down the most obvious route, usually a main road. German forces could predict every move and prepare accordingly. But today felt completely different. Hans, the driver, tapped Klaus on the shoulder and pointed toward a gap in the hedgerow 600 yards to their right.
Fresh tire marks crossed the muddy ground there. Deep grooves showed where heavy vehicles had passed during the night. The tracks led toward a small farm that offered good concealment behind its stone buildings. Klaus studied the farm through his periscope. Nothing moved. No engine sounds came from that direction. But the evidence in the mud told a clear story. American tanks had moved into position while German forces slept. This level of stealth surprised Klaus. He had been taught that American tank crews were loud and careless. They supposedly lacked the discipline for quiet night movement. Willem, the loader, noticed something else that puzzled the crew. Shell casings littered the ground near a destroyed German half-track about 800 yards south of their position. Klaus examined the casings through his binoculars. They came from 75mm guns, the main weapon of Sherman tanks, but the casings lay scattered in a perfect triangle around the destroyed vehicle. This meant 3 different Sherman tanks had fired from 3 different positions at the same time.
Coordinated fire from multiple positions required precise timing and excellent communication. Klaus had never seen American tank crews demonstrate this level of tactical sophistication before. German tank doctrine taught that American crews were poorly trained and badly led. They were supposed to bunch up in groups and make easy targets for German gunners. Otto, the radio operator, picked up American radio chatter on his equipment. The voices spoke in calm, professional tones. They used code words and map references that showed careful planning. Klaus listened to the intercepted communications and felt increasingly confused. These did not sound like the panicked, disorganized Americans he had fought before. The contrast between what Klaus expected and what he observed grew stronger with each passing minute. American tanks were supposed to be unreliable machines that broke down frequently. But the engine sounds reaching his ears suggested well-maintained vehicles operating smoothly. American crews were supposed to be inexperienced farmers and factory workers who barely knew how to drive their tanks. But the tactical movements Klaus witnessed showed professional military skill. A new sound caught Hans's attention from the north. Multiple tank engines were running at idle speed behind a line of trees about 1,000 yards away. The Americans were not trying to hide the fact that tanks were there. They just kept them out of sight behind natural cover. This suggested confidence rather than fear. German doctrine claimed that American tank crews were cowards who avoided direct confrontation whenever possible. Klaus began to notice other disturbing details about American capabilities. The tank tracks in the mud were perfectly spaced, showing disciplined formation movement. The radio communications he intercepted used sophisticated code systems that changed every few hours. The timing of American movements suggested they had accurate maps and good intelligence about German positions. More evidence of American tactical skill appeared throughout the morning. Klaus spotted what looked like a forward observer hidden in a church tower 1,500 yards away. The man had a radio and was directing tank movements with hand signals. This level of coordination between different units impressed Klaus despite himself. German training had always emphasized that Americans could not match German tactical expertise. The efficiency of American logistics also surprised Klaus. Supply trucks appeared briefly at various points around the battlefield, then disappeared again before German artillery could target them. The trucks moved at exactly the right times to avoid observation from most German positions. Someone with detailed knowledge of German capabilities was planning these movements. Hans reported strange vibrations coming through the ground. Multiple heavy vehicles were moving underground through old drainage tunnels that connected farms in the area. Klaus had not known these tunnels existed. The Americans obviously had better maps of the local terrain than German forces did. This superior intelligence gave them tactical advantages that Klaus had never encountered before.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The realization began forming in Klaus's mind that everything he had been taught about American military capabilities might be wrong. The contrast between German expectations and American reality was becoming impossible to ignore. These were not the bumbling, poorly trained soldiers described in German propaganda. These were professional warriors who understood modern tank warfare better than Klaus wanted to admit. Something fundamental was shifting in Klaus's understanding of his enemy, and he could feel the first cracks forming in his confidence about German tactical superiority. At exactly 11:47 hours, Klaus's world changed forever. The moment began with a simple radio call from Unteroffizier Schmidt near the church. 3 Sherman tanks had appeared on the main road, moving east at normal speed. Klaus swung his gun toward the target area and prepared to engage. This looked like the straightforward attack he had been expecting all morning. Through his gun sight, Klaus could see the lead Sherman tank clearly. It was 1,200 yards away, well within range of his 88mm gun. The American tank moved slowly and seemed unaware of the Tiger's position. Klaus felt the familiar surge of confidence that came before an easy kill. He had destroyed dozens of Sherman tanks just like this one. But as Klaus prepared to fire, Hans grabbed his arm and pointed toward the left side of their position. 2 more Sherman tanks had appeared from behind the farm buildings 600 yards away. They were moving at full speed directly toward Tiger 231's left flank. Klaus had never seen American tanks coordinate their movements this precisely before. Before Klaus could react to this new threat, Otto shouted a warning and pointed to the right. 3 more Sherman tanks were emerging from the woods on that side, also moving at high speed toward the German position. The Americans had somehow positioned 5 tanks around Tiger 231 without being detected. Klaus realized with growing horror that his supposedly superior position had become a trap. The flanking maneuver unfolded with mechanical precision that shattered every assumption Klaus had about American tactical abilities. The 3 Sherman tanks on the road were not the main attack. They were bait designed to hold his attention while the real assault developed from both sides. The Americans had studied German defensive tactics and found the perfect countermove. Wilhelm, the loader, slammed a high-explosive shell into the gun breech and yelled that they were ready to fire. But Klaus faced an impossible choice. He could engage the tanks on the road, the tanks on the left, or the tanks on the right. He could not target all 3 groups at once. The Americans had created a tactical problem that German doctrine had never prepared him to solve. Klaus selected the nearest threat and traversed his gun toward the Sherman tanks, approaching from the left. But as he prepared to fire, the first 75mm shell from the American tanks struck Tiger 231's right side armor. The impact rang through the tank like a giant bell. Klaus felt the whole vehicle shake from the force of the hit. His supposedly impenetrable armor had been penetrated. The second American shell struck the rear of the tank, where the armor was thinnest. Klaus heard a sharp crack as the steel plating gave way. Smoke began filling the crew compartment. The engine made strange grinding sounds and started losing power. Hans tried to move the tank, but the right track had been damaged and would not respond to his controls. In 30 seconds of combat, Klaus's understanding of German technological superiority collapsed completely. The Sherman tanks were not the death traps he had been told about. Their 75mm guns could destroy a Tiger tank when fired from the right angles. Their crews were not poorly trained amateurs. They were professional soldiers who understood combined arms tactics better than Klaus had ever imagined possible. The third American shell punched through the Tiger's front armor at close range. The massive 88mm gun that Klaus had trusted to protect him was now useless. Smoke and flames filled the crew compartment. Otto screamed that the radio was dead.
Wilhelm dropped his next shell as hot metal fragments filled the air around them. Klaus felt everything he had believed about the war crumbling around him like the burning interior of his tank. German propaganda had taught him that American industry produced cheap, unreliable weapons operated by untrained civilians. But the Sherman tanks surrounding his position were clearly superior to his Tiger in the ways that mattered most in this fight. They were faster, more maneuverable, and their crews worked together like parts of a single machine. The moment of complete ideological collapse came when Klaus realized that American military doctrine was more advanced than German thinking. The flanking maneuver he was experiencing had been planned by officers who understood tank warfare better than his own commanders. American tactics emphasized teamwork and coordination over individual heroism. This approach was proving more effective than the German reliance on superior equipment and individual skill. Hans managed to get the damaged Tiger moving again, but the tank could barely crawl forward. American shells continued striking the vehicle from multiple directions. Each hit reminded Klaus that his faith in German invincibility had been built on lies. The Americans were not weak. They were not poorly trained. They were not inferior in any meaningful way. Through the smoke and chaos, Klaus began to understand what this meant for Germany's future. If American tank crews could outfight German veterans this decisively, then the war was already lost. The homeland's industrial capacity could not match American production. German tactical doctrine could not compete with American innovation. The 1,000-year empire his leaders had promised was nothing more than a fantasy.
As flames spread through Tiger 231's crew compartment, Klaus realized that everything he had sacrificed for, everything he had believed in, had been based on propaganda rather than reality. The Americans had just taught him the most painful lesson of his life about the difference between nationalist myths and military truth. Klaus felt the heat of flames licking at his boots as he struggled to escape from Tiger 231. The American Sherman tanks surrounded them in a perfect circle, their guns trained on the smoking German vehicle. As Klaus raised his hands above his head, everything he had believed about German superiority crumbled with his burning tank. The American sergeant who captured Klaus was younger than expected, maybe 23 years old. His uniform was clean and well-maintained. His equipment looked new and properly fitted. These were not the desperate, poorly equipped troops described in German propaganda. The Americans searched the German prisoners thoroughly, but treated them according to international law. No one struck them or threatened them. During the voyage to America, Klaus had time to think about what he had experienced since his capture. Every interaction with American forces contradicted the propaganda he had believed for 5 years. American soldiers were disciplined and well-trained. American equipment was superior to German materiel. American logistics were more efficient than anything the German army had achieved. The sight of New York Harbor overwhelmed Klaus completely. The Statue of Liberty stood in the morning sun like a symbol of everything Germany had failed to become. The Manhattan skyline stretched toward the clouds, with buildings taller than anything in Berlin. Ships filled the harbor in numbers that seemed impossible. Klaus began to understand why his country was losing the war. The train journey to the prisoner of war camp in Texas crossed half of the American continent. Klaus pressed his face against the window and watched farms, factories, and cities pass by in endless succession. American farms stretched beyond the horizon with machinery that made German agriculture look primitive. American factories poured smoke into the sky from countless chimneys. The industrial capacity, Klaus observed, exceeded everything he had seen in Germany.
Klaus's first meal at the POW camp shocked him more than anything since his capture. The American cook served roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, bread with butter, and apple pie. Each prisoner received more meat in one meal than Klaus had eaten in a typical week with the German army. The Americans were feeding their prisoners better than Germany fed its own soldiers.
British accent. The camp library contained thousands of books that German censors had banned. Klaus read about American democracy, industrial development, and social progress with growing amazement. These books described a civilization more advanced than anything Klaus had imagined possible. American guards talked about their homes and families in ways that revealed the abundance of American society. They owned automobiles, radios, and household appliances that were luxuries in Germany. Klaus developed a friendship with Corporal Jackson, an American guard from Iowa. Jackson's family owned 400 acres of farmland, using machinery decades ahead of German farming methods. They had electricity, running water, indoor plumbing, and a telephone. They owned 2 automobiles and household appliances that made work easier. This was not the poverty-stricken existence Klaus had expected to find in America. Christmas 1944 provided Klaus with the most shocking example of American abundance. The camp served a holiday meal that included roast turkey, ham, stuffing, vegetables, and multiple desserts. American guards distributed gifts to German prisoners purchased with money from American charitable organizations. Klaus had never encountered such generosity toward enemy soldiers. Spring 1945 brought news of German surrender. Klaus felt relief rather than sadness when the fighting stopped. His time in American captivity had taught him that German goals had been based on false assumptions about American capabilities. Germany had challenged a nation that was far stronger in every meaningful way. The journey back to Germany in autumn 1945 took Klaus across an America already converting from military to peacetime production. Factories that had built tanks were manufacturing automobiles and consumer goods. American society transitioned smoothly from war to peace with confidence and optimism about the future. The arrival in Hamburg showed Klaus the true extent of German defeat. The city had been reduced to rubble by Allied bombing. Food was scarce and expensive. Basic services functioned sporadically. The contrast between American abundance and German devastation could not have been more complete. Klaus's family home had survived physically, but his parents had aged terribly during years of bombing and rationing. His father's business was destroyed. His mother's bakery had closed. They lived on American relief supplies with no clear prospects for recovery. Klaus told his parents about his American experiences, but they found his stories difficult to believe. Klaus found work clearing rubble in Berlin while thinking about his future in a defeated nation. The winter of 1945-46 was the most difficult period of his life. Food shortages and breakdown of basic services made survival a daily challenge. Klaus's family received care packages from American relief organizations during the worst months. Klaus married Anna in spring 1946 and moved to Hamburg, where he found work in a factory being rebuilt with American assistance. The Marshall Plan provided loans and technical assistance, allowing German industry to modernize using American methods. Klaus's experience in the motor pool helped him understand these new techniques.
The birth of Klaus's son Friedrich in 1948 marked a turning point. Klaus was determined that Friedrich would grow up understanding the values that made America strong. Education, hard work, and respect for others would guide his son's development. Klaus began teaching English to German workers interested in American industrial techniques.
His classes became popular because Klaus could explain not just the language, but also the cultural attitudes that made American methods effective. He emphasized that American success came from cooperation and innovation rather than military conquest. Klaus wrote letters to Corporal Jackson and maintained their friendship for decades. He became active in local politics during the 1950s as West Germany developed democratic institutions. His experiences as a prisoner gave him credibility when arguing that Germany's future prosperity depended on learning from American examples. Klaus visited America in 1965 as a free citizen with a delegation studying American industrial methods. He met Jackson, now a successful farmer, whose operation had grown to over 1,000 acres. Klaus spoke at a reunion of former guards and prisoners, focusing on lessons about democracy, prosperity, and national strength. Klaus's grandson asked him in 1994 what he had really learned in America. Klaus explained that the flanking maneuver that destroyed his Tiger tank represented more than military tactics. It showed a way of thinking that emphasized teamwork and adaptability over individual heroism. American success came from intellectual habits rather than natural advantages. Klaus concluded that strength comes from building rather than destroying, from cooperation rather than domination, from education rather than propaganda. America became strong by creating opportunities for citizens to develop their talents. Germany became weak by wasting human potential on aggressive wars and authoritarian control. Klaus died peacefully in 1998, surrounded by children and grandchildren who grew up in democratic Germany allied with America. His transformation from confident tank commander to thoughtful democracy advocate began when American generosity taught him more about true strength than German propaganda ever revealed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.